Gagan, and you're listening to a special episode of the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Beazley. When the famous banker JP Morgan was asked by a reporter to predict the future of the stock market, he gave this now famous three-word reply: "It will fluctuate." Here was someone wise enough to know that making predictions is a hazardous occupation at the best of times, and doubly so if those predictions relate to often fragile and volatile financial markets. But what the evasive and inscrutable Mr. Morgan perhaps failed to realise is that the thought process required to produce a prediction is a very valuable exercise in and of itself. After all, you can only make a prediction if you have a very clear understanding of where you are, what's surrounding you, and the nature and strength of the forces and influences that are being exerted upon the objects of your observation. The ultimate value of a prediction doesn't lie in its accuracy, but in the clarity of vision and quality of analysis and understanding that has gone into making it. What a successful prediction ultimately requires is a large slice of luck, whereas an insightful piece of analysis always carries substantial inherent value and paints a useful picture of underlying truths, no matter the eventual outcome. With this in mind, I've interviewed 6 experts with a highly eclectic set of skills and specialist knowledge, ranging from geopolitics at the highest macro level all the way down to highly specific perils that affect individual companies and the directors and employees who work for them. These perils might be state-sponsored, man-made, environmental, political, legal, cyber-related, or indeed from beyond the Earth's orbit entirely. They will all combine to paint a valuable picture of the state of the world today and the forces and trends likely to shape it and the global insurance sector that serves it in 2026 and beyond. My 6 bold predictors are Beazley's strategic advisor in cyber and AI, Alex Cresswell, CEO of Beazley Furlong Limited, and Beazley's Group Head of Specialty Risks, Bethany Greenwood, Head of Space, Denis Bonsoussan, Environmental Liability Focus Group Leader, Jenny Hahn, Mandeep Gosal, Vice President of Global Professional Services at Beazley Security, and completing our lineup, Beazley's Global Cyber and Tech Claims Leader, Marcello Antonucci. That's a formidable group and a huge collective resource of expertise. So, listen on as we distill that collective wisdom and turn it into a useful and insightful podcast. The first predictions come from Alex Cresswell. Drawing on a just under 30-year career in UK diplomacy and intelligence, Alex is now a consultant whose expertise and insights in security and cyber intelligence, public policy and government matters are highly sought after. His first 2 predictions cover US-Chinese relations and the wider ramifications of the continuing Russia-Ukraine war.
Let's talk about China first. The thing that is going to focus on China is the President of America visiting China in April, and this administration will be very focused on that. And the Chinese themselves will want to make a success of that visit. They will want a situation where it looks like commercial deals are being done that are advantageous to both sides. And the president and his cabinet secretaries, Lutnick and Besant, will also want that to happen. So I think you might actually see in April an uptick in the warmth of the relationship between the US and China. What happens after that is less clear because Xi Jinping is still wanting to leave as his legacy, reintegrating Taiwan into China, and he will want to do that probably not in 2026, probably in 2028, 2029. We may see a major military maneuver, an encirclement of Taiwan or something like that. But for now, this year, the seminal event is the April visit by the president to Beijing.
So it sounds generally positive short term, but more uncertainty potentially long term.
Correct. So if we move away from China and come a bit closer to Europe, and obviously Ukraine is at the center of what we worry about. So there we've had these negotiations in Abu Dhabi, for instance, and the atmospherics coming out of that have been reasonably positive. And that just means that the diplomatic channel is open. It doesn't mean that there's a solution being found. The talks have been described by both sides as constructive. And what we could probably expect to see is continuing negotiations and continuing military confrontation, perhaps at a lower level, but still continuing. In that scenario, if you think about what the Kremlin will be worrying about. They're going to be worrying about the Russian economy and how that's doing. We saw a surge in the Russian economy in 23, 24. That surge has recently died. So you're getting stagnation. You're still getting the high interest rates. You're getting no capital investment. So that will start to pain Russia. And as we see the global oil price stay down, they will find it hard to generate wealth, generate income for the government. And so in that scenario, when you start to get Ukraine still hitting hydrocarbon infrastructure inside Russia, you'll have Russia wanting to dissuade European countries from providing weaponry and support to Ukraine. And they'll do that with grey zone warfare. So it'll be a mixture of cyber, expect an increase in the sabotage that we've seen recently. And remember that probably in the deep background, if you were to ask security professionals in Europe, what is at the root cause of right-wing violent extremism, some of them would say that in the deep background is Russia. So expect that. Expect power companies in Europe who've done well in terms of defending themselves against cyber, expect them to start to confront insider threats where Russian intelligence operatives, but also their proxies in the criminal world, will be approaching energy companies, for instance, financial companies, and doing online approaches, maybe on LinkedIn, offering money for enabling of cyber attacks. So it's a kind of human-enabled cyber that we're going to see more of, and we're going to see it against critical national infrastructure in Europe. When I say Europe, I mean those countries that are important to Russia as swing states, so Italy, Poland, France, UK.
So a potential thawing of US-China relations is in the offing, but continued vigilance by Western European powers against broad Russia-backed security threats to critical national infrastructure are likely to continue to be required. What else does Alex think we should be watching out for in 2026?
I think that we should have an eye on Iran. And there, as you know, we have a US naval detachment currently in the Middle East. It's not clear whether the US will mount a further strike on Iran. But if they do, Iran's retaliation will probably be against shipping. We can expect them to do that themselves, so in the Gulf directly with maybe the IRGC naval forces, and also through proxies, so the Houthis in Yemen threatening shipping in the Red Sea.
Thanks to Alex for a very clear warning of the potential resurfacing of a very familiar problem for marine war underwriters there. Now, from the big trends affecting the world's global and regional powers, it's time to look at what should be on the top of boardroom agendas this year. To do this, I'm ably assisted by CEO of Beazley Furlong Limited and Beazley's Group Head of Specialty Risks, Bethany Greenwood. It seems that there's no let-up for directors charged with running large global corporations, and new potential liabilities are continuing to multiply. The first prediction is on one exposure from the green agenda which should by now be familiar, but combined with one that is entirely new.
It really is looking at what we've been dealing with for the last couple of years, which is allegations of greenwashing. So companies that basically state that they're sustainable or that their products might be sustainable and actually are washing the potential liabilities in that area. So one, we've been calling it greenwashing. There's allegations. There's some very prominent companies that have had litigation against them. And then you get into what has happened in the last year or so with anti-woke, anti-ESG sentiments, and you start to have green hushing, where you have companies sometimes may decide not to disclose certain things that they're doing within their organization on sustainability or diversity because they're afraid of the backlash. So you have kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, greenwashing and now green hushing. And you can think about that same concept of hushing going across multiple things that we've been talking about on the liability side. So really towing the line of the complexity of when to say what and how much to say, and understanding the other side of that equation could certainly be a second set of eyes judging the statements and the decisions that a company has made. And depending upon what your industry is in, it could have ramifications on customers willing to buy your products or not.
The complaint there is, hey, you didn't tell me you were
continue to spend loads of money on these things that probably cost a bit more money or a slightly more expensive way of doing things, but it's greener and it's more sustainable. But you didn't disclose that.
Yes, was a positive potentially, or originally viewed. And so now that the camps are changing, that positivity or that investment that had been made in whether it be more green or more diverse, in certain instances can be viewed negatively. So companies are starting to pull back or maybe not disclose as much of what they're doing in that space.
And the claim will be specifically that it's less profitable that way.
Yes, if you think of a company that is trying to be green and maybe spends 3 more cents on a cup, should that be dropping to the bottom line, or should that be something that the sustainability and the sea of change has moved quite quickly in that space. So companies are constantly trying to understand what that disclosure will be and should they be making it or not. And so I think that's the piece that we always come back to, is having a very robust disclosure committee within the organization and understanding what that will look like.
If you're like me, greenhushing is a word I imagine you've just heard here for the first time. Who would be a senior executive when you might simultaneously be held responsible for either doing too much or indeed too little about the green transition? Back to Bethany for her next prediction.
We also have this very big focus on tariffs. Ever-changing landscape, supply chains or companies are being impacted by tariffs that change on the daily. So we've got a view into 2026 that this could be the year where allegations of tariff washing start to come in. So again, another thing that companies are going to have to focus on. So when you look at their supply chain and how that's going to be impacted, how often do they disclose what that looks like, what that impact would be, how it's going to hit the bottom line, where they're sourcing their products from, are they changing their sourcing because of tariffs, and what does that impact on those companies that might have been buying product from. So there's a whole new kind of can of worms, if you will, that is mirroring the liability and the allegations around greenwashing, but insert a new exposure, which is around tariffs and tariff washing. So that's something that we're really focusing on when we're looking at what the potential liabilities for companies are in 26.
And the claim there's going to be, I make something that's made out of steel, the steel's imported, now the steel's got 100% tariff, I didn't issue the profit warning early enough, or no, I resourced it for a lower tariff producer, but it turns out to be lower quality, and I'm getting everyone's sending this product back because it's not so good as the one that was made from the other steel, for example.
Yes, you're spot on, exactly. Or you cannot source it because it would make the product unprofitable, and you're looking for other areas and can't get there, and you miss an entire life cycle of a product development without disclosing that this tariff could have been a potential. And I do have empathy for companies because they don't know exactly where the tariffs are going to be moving and changing. And so looking at a supply chain is got a different view now, and then how do you disclose that and when do you do? And you also don't want to create a crisis that doesn't exist. So you don't want necessarily to go too far into what the potential ramifications are until you know that that actually is existing. So the drawing the line and kind of threading the needle on the disclosures around tariff and tariff washing, I think is going to be something in 2026 that companies will have to focus on.
Wow. Bethany mentioned earlier about being damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now with tariffs, you might need a sixth sense to know when to disclose and when to wait. Too early and you might be accused of crying wolf, but too late and you might be accused of withholding share price sensitive information. And let's also pause to add tariff washing to the insurance lexicon. The next prediction is all about complexity, but it does bring in AI, both its increasing usage by plaintiff lawyers gathering evidence, but also as another emerging peril for boardrooms to navigate.
The complexity of a company having to decide how, when, what magnitude to disclose an impact, whether that be a tariff, a sustainability piece, a potential AI changing their industry and what they're doing, it is raising the bar, and the complexity will only get higher in our opinion. And always on the other side of complexity tends to be certain industries that are looking for inconsistency. So you're talking about using AI, you can see certain plaintiffs' attorneys use AI to scrape public documents to look for these inconsistencies, whether it be about AI or tariffs or sustainability. So that complexity, I think, is going to be the backdrop for 2026.
So with AI, you could have also people making over-optimistic claims about what it could do for their business, for example, and I suppose it could be also something the other way around.
Completely. Over optimistic, it's going to revolutionize. We're going to be able to change our workforce structure. And actually, none of that's happening. It could be your basic changing workforce structure, not because of technology. Or you could overestimate and think that AI is going to be the next part of your product line. And actually, you're missing the boat, and a technology comes in ahead of you and completely changes the makeup of the company. Stock price suffers, a competitor gets a competitive advantage, and then you have liability there. So the patchwork of complexity is just gaining as you have these new technologies and new challenges that companies and boards have to deal with.
It sounds like we might soon be adding AI washing and AI hushing to our list of new boardroom perils. This last piece from Bethany is not a prediction, it's some advice. But I think having terrified any responsible directors who might be listening, it's the very least we could do. In the light of all we've just heard, I asked Bethany what directors could do to mitigate their burgeoning risks.
I'm empathetic because it's not easy. So when we are looking at companies and we're talking to them, again, having a robust board that really challenges, having audits, if you are going to say a statement, whether it is on sustainability, on ESG, on what you're doing, on tariffs, like having that background and understanding at the moment you're saying it, how valid is it and how confident do you believe in that? Because things will change, and there are some provisions, safe harbor, that protect statements if they change after the fact. So really that audit trail, disclosure committee, avoiding silence is good, but not necessarily always trying to be the loudest voice in the room. And so navigating that depending upon the global framework that that company is in and what that industry is in. I think having a specific strategy as opposed to just a blanket across the board way that you're handling these types of issues, we find it has a much better defensibility in the event, because you can never stop someone from suing you. So you can only do what you can on your end to make sure that what decisions you're making are backed up by strong governance, strong disclosure, and then where you can, professionals and audits that will allow you to attest to what you've stated, no matter what part of the equation we're talking about.
So, as ever, strong auditable procedures and robust oversight are going to be key. We thank Bethany and move on to our third set of predictions, this time from Beazley's head of space, Denis Bonsoussan. As you're about to discover, Denis' remit at Beazley goes a bit beyond space and into the pioneering new forms of energy generation that are just on the cusp of commercial development.
In terms of fusion, I think we're going to see the first time relevant and realistic production of commercial fusion.
And where's that going to be?
In the US. Helion Energy, a startup very well funded, supported by Microsoft, among others, is planning to demonstrate commercial production of fusion at scale next year. And at the same time, they're building the next iteration of the fusion power plant, and all that should be happening in 26. They're taking a page from SpaceX, rapid iteration, starting at small scale and building up the production. We're talking about smaller scale production, but the goal by 2030 is to produce commercial scale production for Microsoft. They are contracted for that.
So prediction number one, provable commercial exploitation of nuclear fusion.
Yes.
Wow, once again, you heard it here first. Fascinating stuff. And another whole new business line for insurance opening up almost overnight. Now, from novel fusion to a new iteration of a nuclear technology that we're already familiar with. Back to Denis.
Next prediction, we stay in power, SMRs, small modular reactors, lots of talks in the recent years, lots of countries having models and plans to develop small modular reactors. This is very much seen as the future of nuclear power. Lower risk, scalable, easy to produce, built-in factory, and deploy at scale. At the moment, still plans at planning level. Only 2 in operation in the world at the moment, but tons of plans and tons of capital being deployed to produce. UK also planning to subsidize SMRs as well through a private company in Wales. Tons of plans, so we'll see the industry moving from plans and trying to go over the regulatory hurdle and start the designing and construction.
So, to summarise that prediction, we're moving from talk to actual blueprints.
Yes.
But perhaps not spades in the ground and shovels on the ground.
Not yet, I think, but that would be a critical step toward breaking grounds.
We're talking about many countries, aren't we?
Many countries, we're talking about more than 50 countries, most Western countries, but also in Asia and all over the world, basically.
So, SMRs, or small modular nuclear reactors, look like they're going to see a breakthrough year in 2026. Finally, I asked Denis for some predictions around his home patch of space, where we know an awful lot is going on.
Going back to the roots, I think space is going to be very exciting this year. Well, 25 was already very exciting. I think 26 is promising to be extremely exciting. Probably the first step toward commercial space station with the International Space Station supposed to be retired by 2030. This is a critical time to start implementing replacement strategy. Probably the first building block being tested in 26. Private company, VAST, for example, in the US, Axiom, and probably Amazon and Blue Origin subsidiary also trying at it. NASA is supposed to issue contract for that. So watch this space, commercial space station. The moon, probably another big item for space. Probably also the first step toward commercialization of access to the moon. Few commercial landers are going to try again to land on the moon. And Firefly, which already succeeded to land the first commercial lander, probably going at it again. So the moon, very much there, and preparatory steps toward full exploration, exploration, and development of an ecosystem on the moon.
That's sort of permanent human habitation there.
Yes, on the moon and around the moon.
And manufacturing on the moon and extraction of minerals.
That's the objective. That's the ultimate objective. I think the idea is to start by building all the hardware around the moon, which would support permanent settlement on the moon at some stage and development of all the resources on the moon as well. The hotter subject at the moment is data center on the moon. That seems to be the best place to put data center, because of temperature management, access to unlimited power, and good connection with the Earth as well. So space data center, probably some of the strongest candidate for the first commercial operation, mining, production of energy as well. So I think those are that, and possibly as well building an in-orbit environment similar to the one on the Earth, so GPS, internet access.
So we'll have the first satellites orbiting the moon rather than orbiting Earth.
There are already a few now, but I think we're talking about sort of a similar operation as on the Earth.
It's a real density.
In-orbit manufacturing, I think also one of the building blocks for exploiting the moon and lower Earth orbit and generating an ecosystem in space. Many companies trying to build various components in space where it's the best place to build those. Chips, foremost. There is a very interesting British company doing that at the moment. They've had some recent breakthrough towards building chips in space, Spaceforge in Wales. And there are also US company doing research and building molecules and other cables, crystals, lots of things that space give you an edge when building those things. And the idea is to bring those things back on the Earth, but eventually to build stuff in space for space. And we're going to see more of that and the real building of a space economy.
So, a large number of potential space landmarks to watch out for. Commercial replacements for the International Space Station, lots of things happening on and around the moon, and infrastructure projects as well as industrial activity either on the moon or simply within lower Earth orbit. After that, it's back to Earth for some predictions from Beazley's Environmental Liability Focus Group leader, Jenny Hahn.
So I think what we're expecting to see in 2026 is probably we were seeing a lot more interest in people redivesting that money into the brownfield space or investing into the renewable energy space. And I think that's what we're expecting to see in 2026 is more transactions happening, more people interested in buying properties, whether it be brownfields or greenfields, for investment and redevelopment. As more lenders are becoming a bit more nervous and financial institutions have more stringent requirements, I think we not only are being used as a risk management tool for our clients, but also allows the creditors to be more comfortable once there's insurance in place to protect everybody. Given the uncertainty in the global economic space, I think more banks are looking to this as a solution, a risk management tool for them.
And is it something about the energy transition that is really unlocking demand here because of we're looking at the conversion of brownfield sites into cleaner energy projects?
Definitely, we have been seeing a higher demand for building solar farms, wind farms, data centers needing to power themselves. And brownfields are a perfect example of where development can be made for those things to happen. They can be purchased quite cheaply, and then they can be remediated and then be put into reuse.
And obviously, if those brownfield sites were related to energy, if you say, for example, look at an old coal-fired power station that's now being decommissioned, then of course it's already ideally situated because it's already plugged into the grid.
Absolutely. That's probably the best case scenario is they find a piece of land that's already connected to the grid. We have looked at quite a few projects, not only converting a former energy like a coal-fired power plant, a lot of former manufacturing facilities, a lot of former general blighted properties where they may be reconnected to the grid. They may have actually adjacent to them renewable energy being constructed, a lot of BESS systems, a battery energy storage systems being built to support a lot of these projects. All in all, they are very positive, very environmentally friendly type projects. And we expect that there's definitely going to be a heightened demand in 2026.
So lots of demand for environmental liability cover is in the offing as investment in the green transition continues, and many types of brownfield sites are set to be put to a new purpose, which in turn pushes creditors to use insurance more to mitigate their risk. One of the features of the environmental liability product is that it can give cover for enhancements in environmental standards that occur during the policy period. So I asked Jenny what she saw coming up on that front.
There are some who definitely believe that, at least in the US, the federal government enforcement might have slowed over the last year or over the next 3 years, but the individual states have definitely continued to be more stringent about their enforcement. And they're constantly looking at emerging products like PFAS is one, where they're constantly setting different standards. Some could be higher, most could be lower. And policies can be crafted to address that for sure. So that is definitely a benefit of using our product as a risk management tool. There's going to be, I think the EPA is on even the local state level, will be the state EPAs, the state enforcement agencies will be looking to make modifications over this next year and the next 3 years. And our product would be of a beneficial use for those changes.
Thanks to Jenny. By the way, PFAS, or PFAs, are what are popularly known as forever chemicals, and EPAs are environmental protection agencies. But whichever way you look at it, be it driven by industrial, legislative, or enforcement activity, demand for environmental liability insurance only looks like going up in 2026. Now it's time for the first of our two cyber experts to make their predictions. First up is Mandeep Gosal, Vice President of Global Professional Services at Beazley Security.
So I think what we're really seeing at the crux of what we are predicting as cyber behaviour and attacks and defensive behaviours over the next 12 months is really driven through the lens of resilience. What I mean by that is how well are organisations prepared to respond in the event of a breach or an incident, given the proliferation of tools out there and geopolitical climate and regulatory demands, which are really placing a huge amount of pressure on organisations to reduce the time it takes to respond and respond well. So I'd probably focus on one aspect around geopolitical tensions as kind of one obvious one around us in terms of the Ukraine-Russia axis, cyber operations perpetuated by cyber criminals in Russia, targeting critical national infrastructure of the UK and the US. That's placing a lot of pressure on public sector bodies and organisations to, again, detect those sorts of attacks, which are increasing in frequency, but also in impact velocity. And what I mean by that is the amount of impact an attack can have on an organisation. And we've only seen with Jaguar Land Rover in the UK just in the last 6 months, when the entire organisation from an operations perspective was brought down for almost 2 months, I believe, And that had a real-term impact on the wider British economy. So because of that, we think that the frequency and the impact of these attacks will increase. And also what we're seeing in the EU and the UK and the US is complexity around regulatory demands on organisations. So governments are sort of waking up and sort of realising that these attacks are big and real and nasty, and they can have a real impact on not only the organisation's profitability to exist and remain operating, but on an entire economy's GDP. So therefore, the EU Privacy Act, the Cyber Resilience and Security Act, which is being pushed through Parliament at the moment, which we'll probably see being legislated, is really increasing pressure on organisations to respond within 24 hours to notify of a potential breach from a compliance and legal perspective. Within 72 hours, I think we're hearing from the Cybersecurity Resilience Act, organisations need to produce a full report. So this is quite in contrast to even GDPR, where there were 72 hours to produce a preliminary report. So a lot of pressure from a myriad of overlapping regulations, which are often brought into existence due to a specific incident or a trend in supply chain attacks or critical national infrastructure. So this is quite a confusing environment for organisations, and the time to exploit vulnerabilities is starting to reduce from months and days to hours and seconds through the proliferation of agentic AI tools. So it's a multi-axis threat landscape. The time to exploit is being vastly reduced, and we see that only reducing further in the velocity of the impact. And also the regulatory landscape is becoming quite a complex landscape. Often AI and automation are ahead of the regulations. So I don't know how many more regulations can be brought out with overlapping demands on organisations, which is creating a whole bunch of pressure. There's also interpretation, which occurs in the very early stages of a new regulation. And also those attacks, which are increasing in frequency on critical national infrastructure, driven through geopolitical tensions and what's going on in the wider world, which is only increasing. Just in the last 3 weeks of January, we've seen a number of attacks on Venezuela, cyber operations purported to be used by the US government during that kidnapping of the president in Venezuela. And we're only seeing these things attack and becoming more unpredictable. We live in a very unpredictable world. We're probably seeing the pressures placed on organisations just becoming exponential. So they really have to look internally and decide we've really got to change the way that we're applying our controls, and we're applying our entire approach to cyber resilience, because the cyber resilience of 2025 is going to be outdated by the end of next week.
An incredibly rich and comprehensive scene setter from Mandeep there. There was reference to our first guest, Alex Cresswell's second prediction early on, but the picture is one of everything speeding up and alarm bells ringing in boardrooms in 2026. Companies are being attacked faster and more frequently, but also being forced to respond more quickly by regulators. Mandeep mentioned AI, and I asked him to go deeper into this subject, especially into the agentic, autonomous kind. Was the widespread adoption of agentic AI in commerce causing new cybersecurity problems? And perhaps more importantly, was the automation of hacking through AI agents behind the increase in speed and frequency of attacks?
It's real. And I think I'll start with the aggressive use and rollout of agentic AI from a productivity perspective. Most organisations in the world are using agentic AI to create efficiencies, which is reducing headcount, is changing the way that companies operate. But what's happening is when these agents are rolled out across platforms in chains of agents, they are creating semi-autonomous or fully autonomous actions within those businesses. And that creates something called non-deterministic behaviour. And what I mean by that is that ask it a question and it doesn't produce the same answer every single time. So it might be unexpected behaviour that an autonomous agent, so that agent is taking action automatically without a human in the loop, is very hard to predict which direction it might go. Unleashing these agents within your organizations, creating hallucinatory behavior or unpredictable behavior, is obviously creating risk within the organization, because that creates vulnerabilities within the organizations, which are an unintended consequence weighed up against the benefits. Organizations are rushing to roll out these agents, creating risk. Actions then occur at machine speed if there are errors or if there are unpredicted errors. So humans can't catch up with the speed and the rate at which these errors are propagating. Often then, from a detection perspective, decision-making paths are not always explainable or reconstructible, which makes it very hard to understand where the origin occurred for the particular attack or the root cause, which, if you think about it from a forensics perspective, if there's a ransomware case in point, chains of custody become challengeable. And what we mean there is the preservation of evidence from a reporting perspective under guidelines for the ICO and GDPR and so on. And also, because these agents are non-human, Obviously, they are undetectable in some cases by human-centric controls, such as cloud access, secure brokers, and data loss prevention tools, just naming a couple of cybersecurity controls which are now unable to detect some of the correct and unpredictable behaviors of these agents. And then because of this risk, this new kind of risk that's being introduced into organizations, the attack surface is vastly expanding at a rate that organizations can't predict or control. Obviously, that's kind of a fertile playing ground for attackers. So really what we're seeing today with the incidents that we deal with on a daily, weekly basis is that time to exploit vulnerabilities has been rapidly reduced from months and hours to seconds and minutes. And that's because we are seeing the efficacy of agentic AI agents who are able to carry out penetration tests that were previously run by humans to find the weaknesses in a system or organization, then go and target them, exploit them, gain access to the organization, and install ransomware and so on. So the discovery of these assets, these vulnerabilities within organizations, is being fully automated today. We're seeing this today. We've seen this in 2025. We only see the efficacy, the hallucination rate dropping as these large language models from attack perspective get better over time. That's a real problem for organizations because I think in 85% of cases, these vulnerabilities are exploitable successfully out in the wild. So that means for success from an attack perspective. On the other side of the coin, from an agentic AI defense perspective, absolutely, organizations have got to flip the coin entirely and think about governance and security assurance and security operations center completely differently. It's a paradigm shift. It really is. And the reason I mention that is because there's something called agentic AI efficacy asymmetry. That's lots of long words. What that really means is the advantages with the attackers, the agentic AI attackers. That means from a hallucinatory perspective, that's not really a problem if in 15% of cases the attack LLM is missing. On a defensive side, that's a real problem because we don't know if we're identifying and capturing and stopping the attacks for that percentage of time. From a guardrails perspective, in terms of rolling out these tools, it's not really a problem, again, if you don't have all of the guardrails in place from an attack perspective, because from a spray and pray sort of perspective, if you get 85% right, and you might have some vulnerabilities in your code, you're still attacking and breaching quite a large degree of cases. That's a problem from a defensive perspective, creates additional risk that you need to get ahead of. So we really see this asymmetry between offensive and defensive. So really the onus, the burden is on the agentic AI defensive companies and organizations tackling these problems to stay ahead of what the attackers can do with complete freedom. No real worry of how these LLMs can hallucinate and go wrong. If they get 85% right, that's success.
Fascinating and terrifying, and lots of food for thought for enthusiastic AI adopters. Asymmetry just means that it's not the same from each side. A hacker is rightly ecstatic if it can score an 85% hit rate, while for a defender a 15% failure rate is potentially catastrophic. So is defensive AI being developed to bring this failure rate down? Back to Mandeep.
Most of the R&D investment in startups or these companies trying to tackle that exact problem, how do we reduce the error rate, the hallucinations, the unpredictable, undeterministic behavior of these models from a defensive perspective to stay ahead of the attackers? So we've been talking to a number of businesses, and there's a number of players out there we're partnering with that are building these large language models from a defensive perspective from the ground up. And really penetration testing, or tests that classically used humans to find out where those weaknesses are and exploit them, or at least find where they are so they're not exploitable by an attacker from an ethical perspective, from a defense perspective. Strides are being made in terms of creating chains of agents, guardrails around the defensive penetration testing agent to essentially judge the outcome of the penetration testing agent itself. So these are really hard problems, but some of the greatest minds in cybersecurity dotted around the world are really working day and night to create these solutions which can then be taken to market and work with partners like Beazley Security, for example, to then start to deploy these solutions to really put up the fight and take the fight back to those attackers.
So you'd say 2026 really is the year of agentic AI, both on defense and attack?
Exactly.
Thanks to Mandeep for that. Let's hope that the defenders can use AI to catch up with the hackers and start shutting the gate on them quicker in 2026. Now let's stay in cyber, but move to our final predictions, closer to the underwriting and claims side of the equation. For that, it's time to bring in Beazley's global cyber and tech claims leader, Marcello Antonucci. 2025 was the year when we saw a series of big household name brands get taken offline by cyber attacks. So I put Marcello on the spot and asked him if we should expect to see more and perhaps even higher profile attacks in 2026. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more, bigger. And then the reason is this large data and technology ecosystem is only growing. We now know that they're not perfect. If you scan back and Google some of the outages or attacks, these are not just small nodes. These are some of the largest nodes. And so nobody's perfect. So we're going to see these disruptions. I think a little bit of the prediction, not only that we're going to see more of it, but it might be a little bit more predictable in terms of what folks should expect. And so we not only are worried about the future, but we are learning from the past. And I think there is some hope in these predictions in that if you have a company that's hosting a lot of your data go down, we now know through some of the events from the last 18 months how that plays out, what you have to do in mass, how many claims we see. If it is a core processing unit, what that looks like in the days and months and even years afterwards in terms of business interruption or data recovery. And a lot of the attacks were because a bad guy was trying to affect you. And that's different than when your partner, like a large cloud provider or tech provider, goes out who's trying to help you get back up and running. And so I think one thing we're going to see is these things are going to splash the press, but there will be more intelligence and insights that are helping people triangulate what that experience is going to look like in the hours and days and months. And we have more playbooks and tools and resources to help people get back up and running and navigate the period of time so that they can leverage the information that the mature vendors and insurance sector has to outperform others that are learning the first time. You can't just keep dealing with it on a bespoke basis. To deal with a scale and to meet all the promises of resilience and risk management and insurance is you're going to have to continue to scale your knowledge and response. Of course, there will be parts of this that will be novel. But if we are putting smaller parts in the novelty, I think the responses and the stability of the market and the confidence in the market to respond as we promised is going to continue to grow, which is what we want to see is as people invest more in digital technology, that they're investing more in risk management and they're investing more in the insurance for the things that they need that type of backstop for.
So whilst attacks may be getting bigger and bolder, the insurance industry is getting much more accurate at anticipating, costing, and managing the claims and fallout from loss events. Most importantly, Marcello is confident that insureds will be able to have greater confidence that the insurance industry is going to be able to fulfill its promises. Marcello's next prediction might be a bit of a shock to the system for businesses looking to third parties to solve a lot of their cyber and data security problems for them.
I think another really key piece of thinking from a prediction standpoint is you can't just rely on the decisions you made with technology and process and that everybody is going to perform perfectly in twofold. One, timing and expectations. So just because you bought something and you have this vendor, you need to look closely at their ability to respond to the problem, how big the problem could be. It's still your problem, and you may not be able to wait for them. You also may not have as much leverage that you think you have. The sales meetings aren't always what's in the fine print of the contracts. And we're seeing folks sometimes be a bit shocked that there's lack of transparency or there's slowness with a vendor response, or when they look at what they get, they're kind of getting a very small portion of their losses. And so I think it's important to be really realistic and objective about what you can expect from the third-party supply chain, not just from a security perspective, but from a response perspective. And then you need to plan your risk management, insurance, and resilience as if it is your problem, which it is. It's your data. You took it. You make the money off of it. And you're going to want to deliver that promise back to your clients.
I'm a media business, for example, and if there's a massive national outage, I'm nowhere near as important as the police and the emergency services and the hospitals, am I? So I'll just have to accept that I'm not going to be top of everyone's priority list, but of course I'm top of mine, and I need to make sure of that.
Well, and that's how you can outperform.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge opportunity for companies that get this, that they realize that where they're in the ecosystem and what their resources are and their responsibilities, and they have this option, not just option B, but C and D that help perform another. We won't even mention another podcast, Mark, who's just sitting there waiting for them to come back and help them out, but you have flexed. That is the future, is the ability to be flexible and outperform your competitors with these little bits of knowledge that you're picking up in predictions.
So we're all learning something here, including me, on how I probably need a contingency plan in case my podcast host is taken offline. For Marcello's last prediction, I wanted to get another view on agentic AI. After Mandeep's stern warning, it was comforting to hear a viewpoint that was a little more optimistic.
If you're using technology for good and AI for good, for growth or to defend, we're also going to see AI being used for bad and for folks that are looking to leverage their aims to get data or to steal money and overwhelm defenses. And so this battle between tech has existed and will continue, whether it have been just machine learning or better script. Now we're going to see situations in which they're leveraging AI to write the code more. They're going to be using AI bots to overwhelm. They're going to be using AI bots to capture more credentials and to leverage those credentials. And I think that this constant keeping up and this battle to keep the balance is going to be an important one. I think that I like the odds of the good because, yes, there are vulnerabilities in the good uses of technology and even AI to protect that the bad will exploit and try to overwhelm. But part of the problem still are people. And so folks talk a lot about AI being Big Brother, but I'm hopeful for Big Buddy. And Big Buddy helps people to make less mistakes. And so if it's helping us to not click on the link or to look at all the things the trainings are telling us to look at and that we miss while we're working really fast, we're going to start to see a lot less vulnerabilities. And what we'll be left with is the most sophisticated nation states leveraging AI, and then obviously fighting against the most sophisticated nation states trying to protect the most critical things. And I think that last part, Mark, is important, that the more critical your information or project or data is, the more care and the more thought and future-proofing you need to have. And it's not just about protection, it's about whether or not it should be connected and how much it should be connected. There are really difficult strategic conversations I think folks are going to have. I think a lot of what we see people that really do resilience and future-proofing well, some of it is a lot of segregation and classification and these barriers and firewalls that just may make business a little slower, a little less efficient, but make sure that that thing cannot be touched or is rarely touched, or if it is touched, it's quarantined.
Thanks to Marcello for painting things in a way that makes me feel slightly less helpless. I do hope that Big Buddy will be looking out for all of us in 2026. It certainly seems that we're going to need extra vigilance. That's the end of this prediction podcast. US-China detente, greenwashing, tariff washing, and AI washing, nuclear fusion, small modular reactors, manufacturing in space, increased demand for environmental liability products, and the year of agentic AI-powered hacking and cyber defense. You just heard all about these and many more issues. It only remains for me to thank Alex, Bethany, Denis, Jenny, Mandeep and Marcello for their valuable time and fascinating thoughts, and to wish you a happy and prosperous 2026. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this program. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.